Great. Well, hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jen Hinderleiter, and I'm the Executive Director of Elevations Foundation. And I just want to thank you for joining us today for the third session in our series of nonprofit training opportunities that we're offering for free to the community this year. Our mission is to bring people and resources together to strengthen communities. And we're so proud to be able to help strengthen all of the amazing nonprofits in our community through this series. If you have any questions during today's presentation, I know we're set up in a webinar format, but we'd love for it to be interactive. So please go ahead and put questions into the Q&A or the chat, and we'll monitor it and make sure that your questions are answered throughout the presentation. And we are very excited to have Maura Horn as our presenter today. As the Vice President of Learning and Development at Elevations Credit Union, Maura is responsible for overseeing training and development, as well as knowledge and change practices. The learning and development team is involved in just about every project at Elevations, from onboarding and training new hires to creating and putting resources into the right hands for project success. Prior to joining Elevations in 2020, Maura was a leadership and strategy consultant and coach, using her experience from working in various industries such as manufacturing, engineering, and construction, and many positions to help companies craft meaningful strategies and prepare the leaders of the future. So Maura, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll go through a PowerPoint on giving and receiving feedback. So I'm used to really getting some interaction from folks. So I might post some things in the chat tool as well, just to kind of get things moving for you. But well, I'm going to first put a chat in there. Why did you choose to use your valuable time today to attend the webinar on feedback? What is it about this topic that draws so many people in? We've heard over and over again that giving and receiving feedback, whether it's coming at you from someone else or you're offering it to someone, it's hard. And we often let those opportunities for providing feedback just pass us by. If we're going to keep improving, then we need to get better at sharing feedback. And that means, across our organizations, up to those people who we're reporting to, any one of our stakeholders, down to the people reporting to us. So we really need to get better at giving and receiving feedback overall. So I want to start with the foundation of what is feedback, because we don't often talk about what it is to begin with. And so feedback is specific, structured information that one person offers to another about the impact of their actions or behaviors. So it's really about giving that really specific information about the impact that something is having. Now, feedback can be formal or informal. So it can be a planned meeting or a performance discussion, or it could actually be something a little bit more spontaneous, situational. We also have feedback that could be appreciative or constructive. So feedback that is appreciative is positive feedback. And the stuff that you would usually consider as negative feedback, that's what we call constructive. The term constructive lets us know that we are all works in progress and that feedback is designed to help us do a little bit better. So formal, informal. Formal could be very planned, follow existing processes, could be documented, tracked, monitored feedback conversations. And then informal is more spontaneous, situational, undocumented. And so we actually tend to get opportunities for both in the roles that we play in organizations and, just in our relationships in general. From a positive or appreciative feedback and constructive feedback, we also hear a lot in the news about how much you should be doing of each, whether it should be, appreciative pieces of feedback and how much that should outweigh constructive pieces of feedback. I don't know that there's a lot of research out there, but I don't know that there's a set rule. I hate teaching on things around feedback of like, start it with something positive, put something constructive in the middle, then end it with something positive. You don't want that feedback sandwich either, because they'll miss the opportunity that there is for improvement there. And so whether you're a leader or an individual contributor, whether you're dealing with your stakeholders, we're always very interested in understanding our blind spots. And so we really need to understand that what feedback is and why it matters to us. But before we go too far, I want to dispel a few myths. There has been articles, blogs published with headlines that may be a bit least misleading. It's common to hear about situations where feedback just didn't go very well. This April 2019, so it wasn't that long ago, Harvard Business Review published several articles about the qualities of feedback that make it most helpful to people. And many people talk and write about giving constructive feedback and when it's helpful and when it's not helpful. So we're here to tell you that when it's done right, feedback is not only desired, it's actually expected from people. And the best feedback is going to be immediate. It's going to be on target. It's going to be constructive, and it's going to be potentially documented. So we know that people want it, and to create a culture of continuous improvement, it's really critical that we give and receive feedback well. People want it, and there are qualities of this feedback that make it successful. So we want to set you up with the right skills to do it well. So let's spend a few minutes just talking about the importance of feedback. Why would any organization want to create a culture of feedback? Why is it important? I've put a couple of bullets on this slide here about why create a culture of feedback. And a culture of feedback really is an organizational environment that values that open and transparent and continuous communication around how things are going and the impact that people are having. That requires really strong and capable leaders. So, why create a culture of feedback? First of all, I would say it starts with self. The self-awareness piece is really that ability to understand the things that make you are who you are. That's your personality type, the actions that you're taking, the values that you profess, your beliefs that are core to your being, your emotions, your thoughts that you bring into any kind of conversation with folks. Receiving feedback for self-awareness helps you, each of us actually, understand our impact. It encourages us to self-reflect. It encourages us to kind of go on a little journey that really truly helps shape our interactions going forward. It really helps us shape our decisions and the processes that we use for deciding. And it allows us to do a little bit more personal growth. So self-awareness is a big reason why you want to create a culture of feedback, to know how you are doing, to gather perspectives from other folks. A culture of feedback could also allow course correction. Now, feedback provides some of those insights into whether we're on track or off track. And once we get that feedback, we can adjust, whether that be I have to adjust my behavior, I have to adjust my interactions, I have to adjust my strategies, even our tactics for achieving our strategies. So when we look at our business metrics, we're getting feedback. So why would we not get it about our particular behaviors, our actions, our tactics, our strategies. Those are the things that would allow us to then know what's working and what needs to shift. Feedback is also quite empowering. It's empowering to teams. And you might not think about it that way, but leaders who listen and act on feedback, acknowledge contributions, and address concerns, which boosts morale and engagement. So acknowledging those contributions creates that culture of feedback, right? If you hear it and you act on it, it gives others the courage to continue to give it and even to receive it themselves, because they're seeing it as, we all have a place to go. We all are a work in progress. So it really empowers the team to deliver, to contribute their thoughts, their ideas, their perspectives to things. It actually strengthens relationships. How important are strong relationships to you? In the business that you're in the organization that you're running, how important are strong relationships to you? Really think about that, because effective feedback really fosters trust and transparency. Leaders who actively seek input from their team members and from customers, whoever they look like for you, you end up building stronger relationships. You develop deeper collaboration skills, and everyone gets to feel like they can contribute and that their contribution then has value. So it really, really fosters that trust and transparency. And then finally, continuous improvement. Constructive feedback, the kind that's really specific, that's really actionable, that's timely, it's delivered well, is a supportive communication tool. It provides guidance for growth. It provides guidance for improvement. It encourages learning. It encourages adaptation. And so those are the things that come from a culture of feedback: self-awareness, course correction, empowerment, strengthening relationships, really continuous improvement. And I'm sure that in the organizations that you're in, the relationships that you've built, you're dealing with some complex challenges. My guess is you also feel resource constrained as you try to balance your mission and your financial responsibilities. And wouldn't it be nice to live in a world, or at least work in an organization that demonstrates the self-awareness, that course corrects when necessary, that provides empowerment to their teams, that builds strong relationships and continuously learns and grows? Wouldn't it be nice? So a feedback-rich culture promotes all of this. And feedback is a powerful tool. It can drive positive change. It can enhance your effectiveness. I have a favorite author that I follow all the time, and her name is Brene Brown, and she says, clear is kind. And so I really think that all of this, the why behind a culture of feedback, it boils down to clear is kind. It truly is. So I feel like if we have this solid reason for feedback, if it's delivered well and it has the potential to do all of this, to inspire and motivate and empower people, then we should really figure out a better way of delivering it. Because if it's delivered poorly, it can do the opposite of some of these things. It can really upset or alienate people. So I'm going to share a model with you that I think is helpful in just figuring out how to deliver feedback, how to develop a culture of feedback that's built on collaboration, not just handing orders down from above. So let's
Maura,
look
we
at,
do have a question so far.
perfect. Yeah.
Yes. So somebody received what they consider to be unfair feedback from a manager and then spoke to their manager about it, but the manager does not wish to retract or ameliorate the feedback, although they did acknowledge that it might have been unfair. Do you have any advice for this person?
That is a great question, especially if that feedback, if it's documented feedback and it sounds like it is. If that question is going towards your performance or your ability um, to argue for more salary or anything like that, I would actually take the approach of documenting your perspective and your own experience. You might even go back to, job descriptions or expectation setting somewhere. If it's like a performance review kind of feedback, then going back to those expectations and identifying what you think actually happened, and doing the documentation. Leaders do have the right to not remove the documentation of that, but it's always helpful to have your perspective added to the documentation. So that's what I would recommend. It is painful to have that kind of stuff documented and not be able to respond to it. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you've encountered that. And if I didn't answer it, put in another question and I'll come back to it. So I want to give a model that you can use to it's kind of really a framework that can be used to structure a feedback conversation, because oftentimes we get in our own way in really organizing our thoughts around how to provide feedback in a meaningful, positive way. And so this model is called the CEDAR feedback model. And CEDAR stands for context, examples, diagnosis, actions, and review. So let me go through this a little bit, and then I'll go through an example so that you can see how this framework actually helps you have a bit of that feedback conversation. So the first stage of CEDAR feedback model involves opening the conversation and setting the context. So it's important for the recipient to be aware of the area in relation to which they will receive feedback. So pretend you're the person giving that feedback. You want to identify the behaviors that you're calling into question. You want to identify the particular context in which you saw those behaviors being used, right? So there's some behaviors that actually require a really delicate balance, such as assertiveness. Without context, you could tell someone to be more assertive and less assertive for different reasons and cause massive confusion on their part. What am I supposed to be? Am I supposed to be more assertive or am I supposed to be less assertive? So context really is key. It's also great to explain the level of impact of such a behavior. So who was affected by it? How big of an impact was it? Was it what they intended? You can even ask them questions. The person who's receiving the feedback from you, you could even ask them questions to discover their perspective, their experience of the particular situation, which the person who asked this question in here about, wanting to remove negative feedback from their history, wouldn't it have been great if a dialogue was opened up that you could offer your perspective, your experience on that particular situation? That's what that context setting is supposed to do. So once the context is set and you understand the area in which you perform some sort of behavior, then you can set about setting out some examples. Having set that scene, you can provide specific, factual, preferably directly observed examples of actions or behaviors that you want to provide that feedback on. Provide enough examples to bring the point to life, but not overwhelm the feedback recipient. You don't want to give them five examples of them doing something wrong. Probably 2 is about enough. And I'll give you an example of what those examples could look like right after we cover this whole model. But you need to remain as accurate and objective as possible in giving those examples and avoid relying on hearsay or rumors, as this will undermine your credibility in even delivering the feedback. So we've set the context, we've given an example. Now we're into the D, the diagnosis. So now the individual receiving the feedback understands the specific areas. The next step is to diagnose the situation with them. This is the process. It usually follows a coaching approach. So in this model, the feedback provider gives the recipient what they think happened and why. Understanding why we behave and act the way we do can help us diagnose then problem areas or success stories, and will be likely be in a better position to turn around a poor one or even replicate an impressive performance if it's appreciative feedback. So this is the dialogue process in which the recipient of the feedback then has a chance to speak. And as the feedback giver, you really want to listen. You listen to what they have to say. By the end of this discussion, hopefully both of you should understand what caused the situation to occur. What happened in that caused that behavior to happen, that action to not happen, whatever that is. The next letter in the model is A, for actions. So having worked to understand some of the root causes, right, in the diagnosis stage that led up to the situation, you then can move into determining what are those actions, what actions can be taken to ensure the situation is resolved or doesn't happen again. This stage is also usually a coaching approach, right? The feedback provider asks the recipient for, what are their thoughts on future actions? What do you want to take as the next step? What actions will you take to get there? What sport do you need from me? Those kind of questions are the kind of questions you want to get into from that action standpoint, because you want the onus and the ownership to be on the individual who's receiving the feedback. And then finally, the R, the review stage. This is the last stage of the Cedar feedback model. And review, it kind of wraps the conversation up. The conversation concludes, but the feedback process doesn't. And so we should keep checking in on the individual, providing reinforcing feedback on a regular basis, having more formal discussion times set aside to just kind of follow up, loop back with that person. As with any goal, they need to be recognized for making progress, and they often need encouragement along the way. And so we don't want it to just end there. And so you want to find a way to have this feedback loop happening in that review process. So this is the model, and it's easy to identify as an acronym, CEDAR, CEDAR. And you can kind of pull out what are the elements that I'm looking for in a conversation. But it's often hard to take it from this like intellectual, what the model says, and then what an example is. So I'm going to go through an example on the next slide here. Let's start with the context. So I'm going to just read this example. Hi, have you got 2 minutes for a quick chat? I know you've been really trying to improve your effective communication in meetings recently, and I have some feedback I wanted to share that might be able to help you reach your goals. Are those goals still important to you? Are you comfortable with receiving some feedback to help you reach them? Now I've set the context. This person knows what that feedback is actually about. It's about their effectiveness of communication during meetings. So now I'm going to give an example. So I noticed a bit of a pattern over the past few weeks in some of the meetings that we've been in. When James is there and starts to speak, you frequently interrupt or you speak over him and he just stops contributing. And it happened in last week's marketing meeting when he mentioned the monthly actual number. And again in the meeting yesterday when he started to speak up about the full year forecast numbers. So now I've given the example. We're moving to diagnosis here now. So now I get to ask questions. So have you noticed this going on at all? why do you think this might be happening? When else might this be happening? Maybe it's not only just James who's having this impact. What do you think the impacts of this might be in other meetings or in this one? Now I can get to action. I've had that dialogue with the person. I've had a little bit of them getting to add in some of their context. Now we can go, thanks for sharing that. It was really great to hear what you think is going on in this situation. What do you think you could do in the future that would prevent this from happening again? Or what could you do in that situation next time? How do you think you can help resolve the current situation? So now we get to sort of problem solve together through the actions. And then we get into the review. Sounds like we got a decent plan. We've made a plan together. Thank you for that. So now I want to know, what role do you want me to play? How should I check in with you to help you deliver that action plan? When should we meet again? And if I see you doing a good job, how should I let you know that? And if I notice you've not done a good job, what's the best way for me to tell you that in the future? That's the example of using the Cedar model. It's simple in context. The framework provides that flow of conversation, but we all know emotions happen. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's easy. You gave me a model. Anybody could give me a model. How do I go about handling the emotions of feedback? So does even the word feedback cause you to sweat a little? Breathe a little shallower? Do you have a little thing going on in your stomach? You're not alone. And it could be as the feedback giver, like, I know I have something tough to tell someone, or it could be the receiver, like somebody just said to you, passed you in the hallway and said, hey, can I give you some feedback? And all of a sudden you catch your breath. You're not alone. Emotions happen whether you're giving feedback or receiving it. That's the crazy part. Emotions happen from the very beginning, from the context setting, from and it can only get better or worse during the rest of it. And so what do we do? What do we do around helping it get better during the rest of the conversation? And some of us do okay with positive feedback, unless you even have a hard time with getting a compliment. But let's talk a little bit about what happens inside of us and the journey we go on with our emotions. So I'm going to bring up an image here, and I don't know if you guys can chat in here, but look at this little guy in the image. If you can chat in, what do you see going on here? What happens when a child gets to this kind of point? I mean, most people say, oh, he's having an absolute breakdown, right? Nothing's going in, nothing's coming out. He's having a fit. The title of this slide is called the amygdala hijack. You're not going to remember that word. It's a crazy word, but what I want you to remember is it is a well-documented fact that when we feel threatened or under attack in any sort of way, very predictable things happen. Our brains sort of go into this survival mode. Our primitive brain takes control, and some of our higher level cognitive functioning is actually disabled. So I'm going to point to the back of my head here. The amygdala is part of the limbic system. We take in all sorts of input from our environment through all of our senses. Our sense of sight, smell, taste, hearing, touch, everything comes in up through our spinal column. And the amygdala is part of that limbic system. So all those inputs come through up through the amygdala and into the prefrontal cortex. And I just saw, thank you, attendee, for telling me that chat is disabled. I won't be asking you to chat in. Sorry about that. But the amygdala is part of that limbic system, that everything that we take in from our environment comes through there before it gets to our prefrontal cortex, which is our cognitive functioning. So studies actually say we could have a 10 to 15 point IQ drop if we're in an amygdala hijack, where the limbic system, where the emotions take over. This is that fight, flight, or freeze. That's our primitive brain, right? So if we have that immediate reaction to something like feedback or any other kind of threat or feeling of under attack, we might lose the ability to really function cognitively. And some common things happen to us. Our perception of time. All of a sudden, we're in the moment. And most of us have no idea how much time is passing while we're dealing with whatever that perceived threat is. Our memory is skewed. Remember, we're in the moment, literally in the moment. And so our ability to remember anything backwards that happened or forwards to think about the impact that our reaction is going to have is impacted. Our field of vision. So normally if I hold my hands out here, I can see both hands. My peripheral vision is pretty good. If I'm in an amygdala hijack, I no longer can see my hands. I can only see about 30% of what I can normally see. That's what happens to our vision. It kind of narrows down into what's directly in front of us. If I do have some memories, they're negatively skewed, right? We're in fight or flight mode, and our brains point us to remembering all the negative things, either about that person, about the situation, about an experience we've had just like this before. And then our attentional spotlight, it is as if we had a flashlight on our brain and we're only able to focus on that one thing. We can't see the big picture anymore. We're in it. We're in an amygdala hijack. So you know what the problem with this is? When feedback can have that kind of result, when feedback could cause us to go into amygdala hijack. And like I said earlier, feedback, just even the word feedback, like if somebody approaches you and says, hey, can I give you some feedback? Immediately, what happens in your body? Psychologically, physiologically. I know for me, my heart rate starts to beat faster. I start to get a little sweaty in the palms. You might have some shaking or some anxiety, or your stomach, gut doesn't feel just right. There are really big signs of an amygdala hijack. It's a sudden onset, and you don't really have control over it. And so we really need to think about the emotional roller coaster that we go through when we have these kind of feelings or emotions. And so I'm going to show you another model here. It's called the Sarah model. You might have seen this before. It's a grief model, actually. It's when, and you might think, what are we grieving? when we're receiving feedback or even giving feedback, what are we grieving? A lot of times we're grieving having to make changes. We're grieving maybe the misconceptions of our ego or our own self-esteem. And so this little graphic here, which is the horizontal is time. And so we've got this, the horizontal is time passing, and the emotion is from low to high. So the S in this model, in the Sarah model, is shock, right? It's the first phase. It's our initial response to feedback. It's the first phase. We haven't had time to process it yet. There's little emotion because we're still sort of in shock about what might be coming at us. And when people are experiencing shock, they may say things like, I don't understand, or this can't be right, right? So there's low emotion, and we're just in this kind of state of shock. As time moves on, we get to this first A in the Sarah model. And that A stands for anger, but it could be tears, it could be fight mode, it could be anything. It's where our anxiety is really high. We realize what the feedback means. And now you're either mad or you feel threatened or attacked, and it feels unfair. And you may say things like, who said this? Or, this isn't fair. You might even actually exclaim that it's not fair. And then time moves on again, and your reaction level is still pretty high, right? The feedback still indicates that there's a need for a change. But we may experience this period then of resistance, and that's the R. And this is where you might think about the blockers, right? The people who you're trying to give feedback to are basically saying, that's just the way I am, or they're denying it ever happened, or they're rationalizing it, they're making excuses for it. There's all sorts of things that we see in that resistance stage. And then you hope that with some skill and with some time, emotions will come down, we begin to process the feedback, and we come to a point of the second A, which is acceptance. If you can finally see that you can see your part in it, you can understand the other person's side, their perspective, you are then at a point where you're ready to sort of move forward. Now, some people add an H at the end of the Sarah model for hope, right? It's truly is where you can hope that something can be different going forward. The danger zone is if we allow someone to stay in this anger or resistance mode for too long and can't get them all the way to acceptance. So we have to learn how to react to feedback. Because when we can create a space between the trigger, whatever that trigger is of our emotions, and how we respond, we then can avoid some of the emotional reactions that pop up for all of us. And things then can feel so much less like an attack. Now, I'm talking to you. You might be you might be a giver of feedback or a receiver of feedback. This will benefit us both. Learn how you react to feedback. When you learn how to react, when you observe and you're mindful of how you respond to feedback, it's a really essential starting point. You've got to figure out what in feedback triggers me, and then how can I manage my way through that process. So let's just connect some things here. Our thoughts and conclusions about a situation tend to drive the way we feel about it. Good, bad, and neutral. And our feelings, in turn, shape how we will behave. You could even go the other direction. Our feelings, right? Remember, everything comes in through our limbic systems, which is our feeling center of our brain. Our feelings about something create thoughts about something, and those drive our behaviors. So our behaviors are a reflection somehow of our thoughts and our feelings. So I usually like to give an example of this, and while I can't see your faces in this webinar, maybe you can relate to something like this. Early on as a manager, I had this employee who reminded me of an ex-boyfriend. So I immediately had some resentful feelings about him, which weren't actually about him, the employee. They weren't anything about him. However, I found myself being angry around him. I also had a performance issue with him. I had the frustration of him not getting his work done. So then I was contributing the feelings that I had around him, my frustrations that I had around him not getting his work done, and I was labeling it as lazy, just like my ex. My behavior around him then wasn't helping the situation at all. I see it now. I actually saw it quite clearly about 6 months in to me managing him and trying to get him to perform a little bit differently. But in those 6 months, I either avoided the conversation with him, or when I did have my one-to-ones with him, I went in very guarded, very abrupt, and it's probably not what he needed. He needed more guidance and direction from me. It was his first time in a corporate environment. He came out of the Navy. He came out of being enlisted in the Navy. But I was clouded by my thoughts and my feelings around him, and I didn't provide that direction. I didn't provide that guidance that he needed. Instead, my avoidance of it, or my very guarded, abrupt approach to him, exacerbated the situation. That's how thoughts and feelings can actually impact behaviors. That connection can be a great thing when it's protecting us from something, but it can be really damaging in terms of situations like feedback. So the good news is we can do something about it. We have an opportunity to impact this whole chain of events. So first we have a trigger happen, right? It can be emotionally loaded with a long history or just some random thing that we're triggered on. We form some thoughts, we form some feelings, and then we have some behaviors in response to those thoughts and feelings. The step we haven't covered yet is that we actually have a mental story about the situation. That's the critical inflection point. If we can become aware of the story we're telling ourselves and what's brought us to that point, if we can challenge ourselves about that thought, feeling, behavior triangle, then we have a choice to make. Then we can choose how we proceed. And I love to call this the strategic pause. It could be just a 5-second pause. But if we can be aware of our story, then we can change it. We have a chance then to respond versus react. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist. He's also a Holocaust survivor. He has this brilliant quote that I love that says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space is the strategic pause. It's a chance for each one of us to do a little emotional audit, to do a 5-second questioning of ourselves. Take a breath. Take a breath. Ask yourself questions. It's the chance to actually do a little bit of an audit to say, what is the story I'm telling myself? Our assumptions aren't always accurate. They're influenced by our mind talking to us. They're influenced by everything else that's going on around us. And instead of relying on assumptions to understand what the feedback it actually means, we ought to spend time exploring our understanding of it, asking questions about it, ask for examples, ask for extra details, try to understand both the actions and the impacts associated with the feedback. Remember, you get to choose what you do with feedback if you're the receiver of it. You get to choose whether you accept it or reject it. But I think it's in both the delivery and the receiving of it, that if we all take the opportunity to take that little strategic pause and really think through the mental talk, we'll have a chance to actually evaluate and make a choice about how we respond to a situation, rather than getting caught in an amygdala hijack that could just be driven by our emotions in the moment. So that strategic pause is really that place where could be the difference between a feedback delivery that goes well and a feedback delivery that goes poorly. What I will also say here is your own feelings, thoughts, and behaviors could be influenced by the feelings, thoughts, and behaviors of the person who's receiving feedback from you. Emotions are infectious. So them having an emotional reaction to something could be a trigger that causes you to then have an emotional reaction that affects your thoughts and behaviors. So watch out for that. Watch out for the infectious nature of emotions, and just always be concentrating on the story that you're telling yourself. So you might consider, in that kind of strategic pause, that audit frame, ask yourself a series of questions. What am I thinking right now? What am I feeling? What are those emotions that I feel? What do I want out of this conversation? Am I doing anything to get in my own way? What do I need to do differently? All of that can happen in a quick 5-second breath. A lot of times I will even use language around that to acknowledge that, oh, I'm feeling some emotions right now. Let me pause, and I want to ask a really good question next. Let me think about what that is. I'll actually use that acknowledgement of, like, I've just been triggered, in order to kind of assess and evaluate how I want to respond, how I want to move forward. And so that, I would say, anybody who's been in front of me and has used that technique with me, and then my own use of that technique, has done wonders. As soon as you can acknowledge what those feelings and thoughts are that are happening inside of you, whether to yourself or outright to the person that you're having the conversation with, it allows you both that pause to become aware of the story that you're telling yourself, and evaluate how you might want to respond in that particular situation. Because we all have a choice. We have a choice. And it sounds easy intellectually to sort of identify our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors. But let's be real, it's hard. It's hard to do in the moment, but we get to choose our hard. When you choose your hard, you get to choose the effective path, which is respond, or you could go down the less effective path, the reactive path. And by that, we mean you can work from a place of trying to get better, doing things that help you become aware of your mental stories, that challenge your own mindset, that help you face the fear, that help you take on new risks, that help you focus on what you really want to create in a situation, versus what I call the victim detour, the react pathway, where you allow yourself to get hijacked, where you work from that reactive place, where you either feel safe in the moment, or like you do something that, kind of makes you feel good in the moment by reacting to something. Knowing, though, that this reacting path will probably create a mess that you're going to have to clean up later, and it will actually create a tougher, longer path. So I would love to lose the last 10 minutes to really just find out what questions that you guys have. Or you, and it looks like chat has been enabled now, but you're feel free to chat in or put in any kind of questions that you might have about either giving feedback, receiving feedback, creating a culture of feedback. Anything that was your desire for, and yes, Josh, we'll make this PowerPoint available and the recording, I believe, Jen. Anything, you know, you chose to attend a webinar on this topic. And I'm wondering what else is out there? What questions do you have? And while you guys are typing in or getting ready to ask your questions, if you have any, I will recommend that if you want more information on the CEDAR model itself, the CEDAR, mindtools.com has a great framework that you can go through and kind of study it a little bit more. Oh, Josh asked a question here. How do you broach the redo of a meeting that didn't go well because of a limbic system hijack? Oh, isn't that, wouldn't we all would love to redo? Take a mulligan, right? Around a meeting that didn't go so well. I think when we try as leaders to create that culture of feedback, I think it actually empowers the team to say, hey, can we do a little rewind on this? We had a lot of emotions come up around this particular topic or this behavior or something. And we didn't, you know, we all had different expectations of what this meeting outcome was supposed to be. How about we do a reset? Let's actually start again with expectations. Let's create a space where it's safe enough for people to open up the dialogue and bring in a number of different perspectives. And if it's not safe enough to do it in person and people aren't thinking, aren't don't have the capacity to think in that moment, actually asking people to document some ideas and thoughts before they come into the meeting, I think that might be a really great way to hear all the voices, let those people who are internal processors think through things, then bring it back together and kind of reconnect on what are the outcomes that we were looking for this particular meeting and what were the emotions that clouded it to cause it to not go so well. I think that would be, you know, I think if I was invited back into a meeting that went poorly the first time, I actually would have a lot of respect for the person who did that, who was able to pull it back together. And I would have a lot more thoughtful contributions to make rather than being triggered in that particular moment. Let me read Anna's comment. The bipartisan respond react analysis feels a bit restrictive, demonizing any reactions at all. Should there be another mid-space option to incorporate positives and the benefits of both paths put together? Anna, I so appreciate that comment. Thank you for that. Yes, I was trying to come up with something that balanced two, and they're not mutually exclusive, right? They're not one thing happens and then you can't do the other. There is probably something in between. And I think that something in between often is the acknowledgement of your initial reaction, of your initial emotions in something with something playing in the background of how do I now have a choice around how I respond to this. So it's the idea of being aware of the choices in front of you versus not being aware, thinking there's only one choice, which is either fight, flight, or freeze. And that's sort of the difference that I was laying out there. But I do feel like there is probably something in between. My reaction a lot of times is to acknowledge that I'm reacting to something. Like you've just triggered something in me. Great. Thank you for asking questions and chatting in there. Anybody else have anything? Or even anybody have anything to contribute? Things that they've done in their past that have actually really worked for them. And while you're thinking about that or typing in any other additional questions, I'm going to leave us with a quote. This quote is from another author that I actually really love and follow all the time, is Simon Sinek. And he said, the willingness to ask for and receive feedback is essential, because how are we going to even get better if we can't see where we need to improve? It's that simple. We look at business metrics all the time. That's feedback about whether or not our strategy is working or our approach is working. Why would we not want the same for whether our actions, whether our behaviors, whether our beliefs are actually working? It's the same kind of thing. It's the same kind of feedback as business metrics is to whether our business is running the right way. This creating a culture of feedback actually allows us to embrace continuous improvement. I'm not seeing any additional questions in there.
Well, Maura, thank you so much. This was such a helpful presentation. I hope it was helpful to all of our participants as well. And you'll get an email from the credit union in a day or two that has today's recording and those PowerPoint slides as well. So look for that. And check out the credit union's calendar. We have a couple other nonprofit training opportunities coming up, strategic boards, and there's a fundraising one this fall as well. So thank you. Hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye-bye, everyone.